I won't introduce, I'll just let her carry on.
Sorry, I'm not texting. I was trying to post the link to the last
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming.
It's not on.
So,
Not on.
Got it.
Yeah.
Hello? Oh,
Yay.
hi. Thanks for coming, everyone. I slept for like maybe 2 hours last night, so if I nod off or start repeating myself, that's why. But I'll do my best. So I am really glad that we're talking about the media and news reporting, specifically with regard to the gender identity debate, because this is an issue that makes me super mad. Canada has been a massive disaster on this, and so I think that it's fun for everyone to complain about the media all the time. I think that's a thing that we like to do wherever we are, but I do think that in the UK and in England in particular, you guys are really lucky. Because there has been really incredible coverage in terms of the gender identity debate. You know, like you have numerous journalists over here who are committed to reporting the truth about gender identity legislation, policy, ideology, and even people who are not, you know, necessarily or obviously biased on this issue, aka critical, are still reporting both sides, or, you know, acknowledging that there's more than one side to this debate, more than two sides even. In Canada, that has not been the case at all. We're very, very progressive and very, very woke in Canada. So we don't like to rock the boat or ask any questions or offend anyone. And we certainly don't value free speech. I do. So we, is not including me. But the Canadian mainstream media has consistently only covered one side of this debate and push the narrative that there are really only two positions that exist with regard to gender identity. So you can either be progressive, liberal on the left, aka, you know, in favor of gender identity ideology, supportive of the idea that it's possible to change sex, or you can be a right-wing Christian bigot. And almost across the board, they've refused to acknowledge, never mind engage with, feminist critiques of gender identity ideology and legislation. And, you know, of course, they won't even admit that just regular apolitical people have concerns and critiques with what's going on. When we held the first ever event discussing the issue of gender identity and women's rights in Canada at the Vancouver Public Library in January, the media refused to cover it until protesters began harassing the library to shut it down. The CBC, which is our national public broadcaster, had a radio panel with a few people to talk about the event and what I might say at the event and whether or not what I might say would constitute hate speech, but they didn't invite me to come on the panel, and they didn't, you know, ask me what it was I was going to say, and they didn't even show up to the event to see what it was that I did say, even though they're located literally right across the street from the library. So the event was covered in a few mainstream outlets in Canada, but only as a result of the protests, and some of those outlets really just covered the protest, so they covered the protest and then didn't even come inside to watch the event. And then headlines would be that, you know, like a transphobic or anti-trans speaker is speaking at the library. Oh, and when somebody emailed the media late on a Saturday night at like 5 a.m., so I assume drunk, we're using a fake email address that was supposedly my email address, and the email said, "Please be advised, my event has been canceled on January 10, 2019. If you're getting calls regarding it, I have been getting way too," spelled T-O, only one O, "way too many complaints. I have decided to cancel it fully now." And the media ran the story without contacting me to confirm whether or not it was true. It was not true. I did not cancel the event. Our most recent event addressing the issue of trans kids, featuring a panel that included myself, and an incredibly articulate, bright, young, detransitioned woman from the US, as well as Dr. Ken Zucker, who ran the gender identity clinic in Toronto for over 2 decades before being fired as a result of a smear campaign by trans activists. The trans activists was attended by 250 people, or 260 people actually, and protested by somewhere between 150 and 200 trans activists. We sent out a press release to every outlet possible in Canada prior to the event, and they completely ignored it. Since I've been in the UK, I've been in touch with several journalists, all of whom have been genuinely interested in and concerned about the issues, questions, concerns, analysis, and so that's to say they're not only covering the issue, but they're covering it fairly and critically and asking really important questions. And acknowledging the fact that feminists have genuine concerns. It's not that we're transphobic, it's that we're genuinely concerned about women's rights. Shocker. So the journalists here are doing their job. In Canada, not a single media outlet has contacted me ever for an interview about my work on this. There was one mainstream outlet that reported on my Twitter ban, despite it being reported across the US, and despite the fact that the reason I was banned was because a Canadian man, I called a Canadian man who tried to sue 14 Canadian estheticians who declined to give him a Brazilian bikini wax heat. So this is a Canadian story. Yeah. Canadian media was responsible both for protecting this man's identity, so they kept him anonymous. They did not protect the identities of the women he was trying to extort money out of. They also were responsible for propagating the notion that he was in fact a woman by using female pronouns. No outlet has published coverage of the feminist analysis of gender identity except to smear and label us as transphobic. And in the rare cases they have bothered to contact the other side, i.e. us, the final article has pretty consistently included libel, inaccurate quotes. Reporters have, altered my quotes intentionally, I assume, and misrepresented us, and of course included quotes from trans activist commentators who make untrue statements that are allowed to stand unchallenged. Most often quoted, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, is Morgan Auger. You know him. He's a local man in Vancouver who's responsible for advocating the City of Vancouver cut funding a $30,000 grant to Vancouver Rape Relief, Canada's longest standing rape crisis center. A real progressive guy. Their transition house serves 1,200 women a year and houses 100 women and their children. So definitely a good space to go after for a human rights activist. Auger has been targeting me specifically for years now, in recent months amping up what's become a pretty disturbing obsession with me, essentially threatening to have me charged with hate crimes and thrown in jail for calling men who identify as transgender he. In a Star article about the event in January, the reporter quoted Auger saying that my previous statements and videos spread hatred and discrimination towards trans people, and that I had made false statements about trans people. So by that, what he meant was, again, that I refer to males as he, even if those males identify as she. But the media just kind of goes with those quotes and doesn't challenge them and doesn't ask me for a response. And he's quoted all the time in the media. So in other words, their go-to spokesperson on trans rights is an unhinged man who harasses, bullies, and libels women like it's his full-time job. This is also a vice president of the NDP, which is our provincial leftist political party. They've never held him accountable for any of this, of course. So, it really blows my mind. It makes me really angry, obviously. Literally everything trans activists do is turned around onto us, onto women who are defending women's rights. We're accused of violence, of harassment, of bigotry, hatred, biological essentialism, of being oppressors, and so on and so forth. And it's the most insane Orwellian reversal because, of course, the truth is that this entire movement, transactivism, is based only on lies. It's not about rights. It's not about protecting people from violence or discrimination. It's about forcing people under threat of violence, blacklisting, ostracization, and criminalization to pretend that it's possible to change sex, that there's no such thing as a woman, that women aren't allowed to have boundaries or their own spaces, and that, in fact, women don't even need rights or spaces because they don't suffer discrimination or oppression. They're not a class of their own, and actually, it's only people who identify as transgender who are the most oppressed and marginalized people on Earth. This is, of course, insisted upon by the most privileged people on Earth, white, middle, and upper class university students living in the West. As far as I can tell, this movement is mainly about silencing women and centering male voices. This is what feminists mean when they call transactivism a men's rights movement.
Yeah.
Yep.
Transactivism and all this propaganda pumped out by the media supporting the transactivist narrative has enabled and encouraged men to hurl verbal abuse at women, even perpetrate violence against women, as we saw Venice's first event in 2017, of course. It's turned violent threats into progressive activism, which is either ignored or defended by leftist politicians in Canada, by the media, and by so-called progressives. So when we held an event specifically to talk about women's rights at the Vancouver Public Library, we were threatened with violence, as was the library itself. The media did not cover that. They wrote about us as though, we were the ones responsible for the harm. I have friends in Vancouver who I've known for years who, rather than support me and speak out against the disgusting, dishonest, frightening attacks on me, have abandoned and ostracized me as though I'm doing something wrong by standing up for women, the truth, and what's right. Not all of them, but some of them. And essentially it's because they bought into this propaganda. So this is how powerful propaganda is. Like, without, a person that would know me rather than actually have a conversation with me, read what I'm saying, try to engage with my arguments, would prefer to, read what's said about me online and go along with that. Or, just go along with what their friends are saying because there's so much pressure to abandon women who speak critically about this issue. So we're living in a time where women who say women are female are subject essentially to witch hunts and compared to Nazis. And the media is fully culpable in this because they've chosen to report on, they have the choice to report what's actually going on and who is actually being abusive and violent, who's actually bigoted, who's actually rolling back women's rights and perpetrating harm against women and girls. And they, in Canada, in any case, have chosen to do the opposite, to report lies because it's what's been deemed politically correct. I like to remind people these days when I do talks what bigotry actually means, since we're being accused of it all the time. Bigotry is intolerance towards those who hold different opinions from oneself. It is obstinate devotion to one's own opinions and prejudices. So, knowing that, let's look at who is committed not to engaging, not to discussing, not to considering, reading and listening to those with different opinions. Who is committed to their own ignorance to the point that they would prefer to stand outside and chant lies rather than come inside and listen to what we're actually saying, engage respectfully, as we always do, and try to come to understanding. This is a consistent pattern. When I spoke at a university in Vancouver, the University of British Columbia, a group called UBC Students Against Bigotry announced a counter event in response. So they held a protest against me on campus and refused to attend the event to find out what it is I actually think. In response to our event at the library in January, the mayor called me despicable on the news, despite having no idea what my position was. and he certainly didn't attend our event to hear our concerns. Leading up to the event in Vancouver last week about gender identity in kids, protesters stood outside chanting things like, protect trans youth and let kids be kids. Having no idea that this is exactly what we were talking about inside. You know, this is what feminists are advocating with regard to this trans kids issue, which is let kids be kids. And, you know, clearly we're interested in protecting kids from making decisions about things like hormones and surgeries that have permanent harmful repercussions. This practice of protesting or trying to shut down events instead of engaging is defended on the basis that hearing opinions that challenge our own preferred narratives is somehow traumatic. This is something that's been promoted on college campuses. Obviously, this was studied and discussed by Jonathan Haidt in his book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I think is very good. I mean, yeah, God forbid you hear an alternate opinion because you might end up agreeing with it and then having to cast yourself out of society. You know, gender identity isn't the only issue in debate wherein students and activists respond this way by plugging their ears or attempting to shut down the conversation. It does seem to be part of a broader trend wherein differing opinions or conversations deemed politically incorrect are treated as some kind of contagion. You know, like thinking critically about our own accepted political positions, ideologies, beliefs, or hearing the opinions of those we presume to disagree with will give us cooties. This kind of anti-intellectualism and refusal to think or understand before forming an opinion is frightening in general. The fact that it seems to originate on university and college campuses of all places is quite appalling because it goes against everything I think universities should stand for. Equally as troubling is the fact that reporters and journalists are intentionally skewing facts. For example, reporting on male violence while using female pronouns because the perpetrator has conveniently decided he's a woman. And again, the fact that these people are reporting only one side of the story and refusing to cover challenges to the trans activist narrative because they know they'll be attacked if they just speak to us, if they just speak to detractors, or even acknowledge their concerns about trans ideology and gender identity legislation. The fact that they're intentionally promoting a nonsensical, regressive, dangerous ideology out of fear is unconscionable. This is not why journalism exists. It does not exist to promote ideology. It exists to hold institutions and powerful people to account and to enable democracy. Instead, the media is discouraging and preventing informed public debate. They're preventing people from coming to educated, rational conclusions and forming opinions based on fact. They are participating in what I consider to be mass gaslighting. So one of the reasons I challenge gender identity ideology is because I think it's regressive, sexist, and nonsensical. I think it limits us rather than allowing us a full range of options as human beings with diverse interests and personality traits. I think it puts forth an incredibly rigid understanding of gender and treats biological material reality as something intangible, subject to youthful whims and hair dye. I also think it has incredibly negative impacts on women's rights in particular. And I think that it's important that when enacting legislation and making sweeping changes to policies that impact women and girls, we should be having a conversation about it and engaging in rigorous public debate. What we're losing is quite serious. Women fought for rights in their own spaces in order to ensure they could participate in public life free from harassment and abuse, and so that they could live their lives as autonomous beings. And I don't know how we can possibly defend women's rights in spaces if there's no such thing as a woman, or if anyone is a woman regardless of whether or not they have a female body. The reality is that, of course, we can't. And while everything feminists fought for over centuries is dissolved, within only a few years, the Canadian media is turning a blind eye and calling their propaganda and chosen ignorance progress. It is shameful, And I guarantee that in a decade or two, we'll all look back on this, not only with regret, but with remorse. And just as we look back at McCarthyism, the witch hunts, and the Holocaust, and wonder how society could have let this happen, we'll look back at trans activism and what we did to women and girls under the guise of political correctness, and wonder why so many people went along with it.
Yep.
Blindly repeating mantras so that we could keep in good standing with our Facebook friends, while a few women who dared to stand up suffered the consequences. Thanks. Sorry to be so negative.
Thank you very much, Megan. Just to remind everyone, the hashtag is woke news. Thank you very much, Megan. Canada sounds an absolute delight for women right now. I'm quite glad of no bears or Morgans. So now we're going to have Jo Bartosch. She's a feminist writer, and she's going to tell us all about something wonderful. And these are the slides. So now we have some technical stuff working, so fantastic. Here's Jo.
So, firstly, thank you so much for inviting me here and to be a part of this fantastic panel, and for all of you for coming to listen today. I should say that I'm not a journalist in the same way as the others here are. I'm an opinionated person who writes opinion pieces. So, to explain how I got into this, I used to chair a large feminist group, and as part of that, about 5 years ago, I was asked to write a column for my local paper. And it turns out that I'm good at writing, and I started getting picked up by national outlets. And in 2017, I had a piece published in The Independent about an issue that was worrying me. So I met somebody whose daughter went through a period of years identifying as a boy. And she was just 12 when she discovered Tumblr and YouTube videos of so-called female-to-male transitioners. And acting in accordance with official guidance, she was set by her school and clinicians on a path that saw her budding her breasts and fantasizing about turning 18 and the day when she could have a double mastectomy. And her mum supported her change of name, but refused to allow her. Is that me? No. But refused to allow her to take any medication, and monitored her online activity. Shall I turn it off?
We'll try a different microphone. I don't think it is that one though.
Oh. Yeah, okay. Oh.
We'll try that one. Yeah, that is that's flashing. Oh, that's going so loud.
Is that better?
Yes.
Fabulous. Okay. I can't remember what I got to now. So eventually she realised after 4 years that she was in fact a lesbian, and she narrowly avoided a brutal regime of treatment, which would have included regular injections of testosterone, a double mastectomy, and of course lifelong infertility. Now I received a lot of comment following publication, both to thank me for raising an important issue, and of course accusing me of transphobia, and even of inciting violence towards so-called trans kids. And here's a favourite comment up here from an academic at Goldsmiths who responded to the piece with a blog which seemed to suggest I was advocating some sort of genocide against children. So about 2 weeks after the article was published, I received an email from The Independent asking me to edit my writing in line with the World Professional Association for Transgender Health guidelines. Now, for those who don't know, they're a lobby group, and they are certainly not impartial on these matters. So I considered it. You know, I've been really thrilled to get commissioned. But then I thought about my friend's daughter, and I decided that, frankly, the truth came before getting commissioned. So I breathed deeply, and I explained why I would not amend the piece. And I have never since had a piece accepted by The Independent. And this set me thinking about truth and the duty of the media to uphold it. And And I guess from Freddie Star Ate My Hamster to Elvis being seen in Asda, there has always been a trade-off between truth and sensationalism in the media. Moreover, transgender issues make a great story. There's generally a triumph over tragedy element, and tangentially, it's often about sex, which is guaranteed to make you to copy. And the pressure on journalists today is intense, and that leads to many to write what are often just formulaic pieces, and we all know the form. First UK dad gives birth, or former Marine Tiffany celebrates new life as woman. But this sort of reporting does a disservice to everyone, and it is undermining trust in the journalistic profession. And when I think of my friend's daughter and other confused kids like her, at what cost? Now, we live in an age where it has never been easier to fake footage, to spread lies, and to have these propagated through social media. And from the fake news factories of Vladivostok to the well-meaning but dangerously misguided mobs of blue-fringed protesters. Given this, and the role of traditional media in standing up... Oh, I think my slides are going a bit all over the place. Soph, my glamorous assistant, Soph, my partner, is doing slides. Oh, there we go. Yep, that's the right one. That'll do. So given this, the role of traditional media in standing up to malign influences and reporting the truth has never been more important. And it isn't just now that the tech exists to fabricate video footage and voice recordings, nor that political powers and interests seek to undermine reality. It's that people's identities themselves are increasingly formed online. And these new, shaky, fractured virtual selves are not anchored in material reality, and nor are they tempered by healthy debate. So if you think about it, when one's online interactions through adolescence are using the avatar of a cat-eared anime girl, it might come as a shock to be reminded that one is in fact a bog standard hairy bloke. And arguably, these fragile internet-formed egos are threatened by the slightest blow. And consequently, even a mild challenge leads to rape and death threats. And should be behind me are a compilation of some of my favourites since I started talking about this. In the online world of liberal politics, a new hierarchy has emerged. And that's one where moral worth and status is demonstrated by liking the right tweets, repeating the right virtuous phrases and following the correct accounts. And this febrile environment, inconvenient facts and unpopular opinion are deemed phobic, and phobic people are obviously subhuman. And we all know that in the world of woke, feelings override facts. And rather than take a stand and report the truth, the mainstream media have become complicit in repeating politically correct but morally wrong lies. And virtue signalling is an easy trap to fall into. I know I've done it. But we deserve more than that from the publications we look to, and it is not the job of journalists to coddle the egos of the delusional, nor is it to protect us all from potentially upsetting facts. Can I have slide 3, please, Soph? Thank you. So perhaps some of you think that censorship is a price worth paying to protect, to save offending people. And so here is an example behind us of why this matters. And there are 2 photos. And the first is Karen White, and the second is Tara Hudson. Tara Hudson is a male who committed a violent crime. He hit the news in 2015 when he headbutted a bar manager's teeth out and was sent to a male prison. Hudson had 8 previous convictions, including for battery. He didn't have a gender recognition certificate and boasted in an escorting ad of his 7-inch surprise. He was sent to a male prison. A massive media campaign was launched to have Tara moved to the women's estate. And from Vice to Guardian to The Independent to The Telegraph, there were impassioned pieces illustrated with doe-eyed Tara demanding that he be moved to HMP Eastwood Park, which is a women's prison. His history of violent crime and the fact that he is a biologically intact man, albeit with plastic tits, were rarely mentioned. And following his move to the female prison estate, the guidance on transgender prisoners was changed. So 2 years later, and this is Karen White, a transgender rapist who was imprisoned, and thanks to the new guidance in the female prison estate, where he then went on to sexually assault fellow inmates. That violent biological males can now be housed in the same prisons as some of the most vulnerable women is evidence not only of a failure of policy, but also of journalists to do their job and report the facts objectively. Can I have slide 4, please, Soph? The outlets that condemn the spread of so-called fake news are by and large high-handed hypocrites. When it comes to reporting on people who identify as transgender, they are out of step with public opinion, and indeed with reality. Now, to illustrate this, here's a story from my local paper. And it's a sad story about somebody with serious mental health problems, experiencing the horrors of living on the street. Now, when local readers took to social media to question why an obvious male was being referred to as Amy, their comments were immediately deleted. Presumably, the readership weren't sufficiently educated to recognise that this person has the gender identity woman. What a relief the staff at my local paper were there to correct the bigoted eyes of their readership. And smaller outlets, of course, follow the lead of bigger players. So, can I have slide number 5, please, Soph? When you look at standard setters such as Reuters or the BBC, the editorial bias is equally obvious. And here is a BBC piece about a woman who went on a rampage with an axe. Now, I complained to the BBC about this inaccuracy and was told that referring to the violent attacker as a woman was consistent with their style guide. And this isn't a one-off. Every week it seems as a news story emerges where a woman is reported to have committed a violent crime. Now, last week it was this Merseyside lady with a hammer and male pattern baldness. Now, who sets these guidelines is interesting, and it should be noted that the BBC is proud of its close working relationship with Stonewall. And to my mind, what has happened to media outlets at the hands of transgender advisory groups is a very similar phenomenon to what is described by many economists as regulatory capture. Now, regulatory capture is when governmental bodies are effectively taken over by special interest groups until they morph into what amounts to be a lobby group themselves. And it is clear that by reporting crimes on the basis of an offender's preference rather than the objective reality of their sex, the BBC, and indeed most mainstream media organisations, have turned their back on the truth in favour of promoting an ideological stance. Now, slide number 6, please. So, setting what is an extreme and ideological position as the norm has left the few outlets that do try to report with balance out in the cold. Now, here you can see a protest outside the Metro, and then at the other end of the political spectrum there was a trans activist burning copies of the Morning Star. And there is an irony in the fact that these vicious cry bullies call those asking for truthful reporting fascists. So, echoing what Meghan says, really, I mean, destroying writing that threatens a powerful ideology and working to prevent freedom of expression are the tenets of fascism and bigotry. From my experience, journalists are largely driven by a desire to hold the powerful to account and to inform the public. And doing so in today's climate can be hard. The consequences for not towing the politically correct line include being seen as a deranged, Trump-supporting Christian fundamentalist, losing income, and receiving death threats. So in a way, who can blame them? And for context, and to voice a personal moan, I fight to get my work out. And this year, I have been paid a total of £100 for a gender-critical article that was then pulled at the last minute. All of the others I have written for free. Critical thinking does not pay. And one of the final points I want to make is an inversion of the feminist maxim, and that's the political is personal. Transgenderism has become so mainstream. All of us know somebody within our family, within our friendship circle, or our workplace who identifies as transgender. And this makes it really hard to speak out, because criticism of what is a damaging and dangerous political movement is too often seen through the lens of my good friend Natasha, who used to be Nigel. And this holds true for journalists and editors, as it does for everybody outside the media. And let's remember, a joint BBC and Stonewall survey conducted last year revealed that there are 417 employees at the BBC who identify as trans. And this leads to self-censorship, which is arguably more of an insidious threat to free expression than state censorship. And it becomes difficult to report the truth when you are told that in doing so, you are causing transgender people to kill themselves. So, going back to the blog accusing me of cheering on the suicide of children, balance has now been reframed as hatred. I see she's put the final slide up. I wonder what the laughing was. So, in the current climate, there are very few outlets that will tell the truth. Notably, the Times has offered balance, and it's currently the subject of 2 legal challenges. And this underlines why impartial reporting of unpopular but undeniable facts, like the truth that trans women are men and trans men are women, has never been more necessary. And from politicians to journalists to every one of us here today, we each have a duty to speak up and call bullshit on woke news.
Well, now we have Brendan O'Neill, and I think we know we're in a lot of trouble when someone is controversial, would you say? As Brendan uses preferred pronouns sometimes. And so without further ado, here's Brendan O'Neill.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be in the presence of so many TERFs. Thank you for inviting me into your coven. I feel really, really privileged. As my name suggests, I was brought up a Catholic, so a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today and a lot of the stuff that these women have been talking about for a long time is actually very familiar to me. Because one of the things you had to believe when you were growing up Catholic is something called transubstantiation, which is this idea that every Sunday at Mass, in which I was one of the altar boys standing there ringing the bells, the bread that the priest wheeled out literally became the body of Christ. I mean, literally. You were still eating bread, it still tasted like bread, but it was the body of Christ. And you had to believe that. And it's funny because that's one of the first things that made me think, maybe this is bullshit. And so, and then eventually I became an atheist and all the other stuff. So this trans idea, this idea that one thing can become the complete opposite with a click of a fingers, has always struck me as utterly bizarre. And I find that the current witch hunt of women, and it really is a witch hunt, you really are looked upon as witches by misogynists, by woke people, by certain feminists who've lost the plot. You are looked upon as witches. The current witch hunt really does remind me of the people who in the past would have denied the reality of transubstantiation. They would have been ousted, they would have been demonized, they would have been referred to as deniers of the truth. And I think transphobe and TERF is the modern term for someone who denies the supposed truth. So a lot of this feels quite familiar to me, and it's kind of, the thing that I feel in relation to this whole discussion, it's interesting that Posie, Kellie-Jay, Posie, whatever your name is, introduces me as someone who sometimes commits the crime of using preferred pronouns, because actually, having spoken to Kellie-Jay and others about this, I'm actually changing my mind on that. And the thing is, because it strikes me that a lot of this stuff, a lot of the problem of trans kids, which is an incredibly serious problem, because confused children, or actually perfectly normal children, are being completely and utterly screwed up by this system, or the problem of the kind of thing that Meghan has gone through and others have gone through, which is being silenced and censored and cast out of polite society. All of these problems, it strikes me, stems from an unwillingness of society itself to say a very basic fact, which is a man can never become a woman. And that is simply a fact. If you cannot be a woman unless you are a girl. And I think we really have to start pushing that argument and exposing the hocus pocus idea. It really is hocus pocus, that you can become a woman simply by declaring it, simply by feeling it, simply by having this kind of inner intuition that maybe you should have been born a woman. That is in itself profoundly, deeply misogynistic. You know, we often say, and I think absolutely right, we often say that the kind of witch hunting of trans skeptical feminists is misogynistic, and it absolutely is misogynistic. I know this for a fact because I have been writing about the hocus pocus of transgenderism for 5 or 6 years, and I do not get the same level of abuse as the women on this panel do. So I know absolutely there is an element of misogyny in the criticism of these feminists. But more importantly than that, in the very idea that Monroe Bergdorf is a woman, that very idea is misogynistic. Because what it does, it reduces womanhood to the most shallow, surface-driven thing. It completely and utterly deprives womanhood of its content and of its depth and of its reality. It's biological, relational, cultural, historical reality. All of that is completely wiped aside by these men who say, I'm a woman, and if you refuse to recognize I'm a woman, I will attack you. It's essentially what they say. I always think of that man who was in, do you remember that video that went viral where a man was in a store saying, "It's ma'am," in his really deep voice? And it was really interesting because subsequent to him screaming, "It's ma'am," he said, the guy behind the counter kept calling him sir in a quite instinctive and accurate way. And he says to him, if you want, the man says to him, if you want to see a sir, come outside and I'll show you a sir. And I thought to myself, there you go, that is trans activism summed up. Because what that man was saying is, I'm a woman, and if you don't accept that I'm a woman, I will use male violence against you. That is literally what he was saying. So when trans skeptical feminists or TERFs or witches or bitches or whatever you are referred to by these groups of people, when you gather in public to try and have these discussions, or when you gather in Speaker's Corner or wherever else it might be, and you are attacked by men in dresses, or you're attacked by pseudo women and pretend women and so on, that really is an instance of male violence being used to silence women's voices, and that's as straightforward as it is. And the thing that I've always, in relation to the freedom of speech element of this discussion and the whole idea of wokeness, the thing I've always found very interesting, and Joe's touched on this, is the way in which is the super sensitivity of the trans movement. I mean, you know, there's a lot of sensitivity around these days. There's a lot of snowflakery. There's a lot of people who kind of faint if you criticize their ideology and their point of view. There's a lot of that going on in contemporary society, but it is incredibly pronounced and far worse in the trans movement. And I've always found that very interesting. So I've written a few things about trans stuff. And even I've had, you know, I did a talk in Oxford University a few years ago, and there was this group of trans people having a candlelit vigil outside for all the trans people I've killed. And so I said to them, when did I do this? I've completely forgotten my murderous behaviour. So there's this incredible sensitivity, and you know, any form of criticism of the trans movement is interpreted as an absolute assault on their right to exist. So they will often say that you're erasing us. And of course, you're not erasing them at all. They can carry on doing what they're doing. We don't really care very much. You're simply questioning the reality of what they're presenting to the world. And I've often wondered, where does that super sensitivity come from? And they are more sensitive than any other identitarian group. And other identitarian groups can be pretty sensitive, but they're more sensitive. And I think it's very straightforward. It's because they know at some level that their identity is built on nothing. Yeah. It is utterly meaningless. It's untrue. It's simply untrue. And I think at some level trans activists recognize that. They feel it, they know it, or at least they instinctively fear the disinfectant of sunlight, the kind of the glare being put on them, the questions being asked. And so they have this instinctive concern, and what that gives rise to is an instinctive desire to shut down any form of questioning, any form of debate, any form of criticism. And I think that really brings us around to an incredibly important point about censorship, which is that censorship is fundamentally about preventing people like us and everyone else from asking awkward questions, from trying to discover the truth, from having a reasonable critical debate. That's what censorship fundamentally means. Censorship is the means that powerful groups or influential groups use to deflect criticism, to deflect debate, to prevent ordinary people who they look upon as stupid and ill-educated and transphobic and racist and everything else, to prevent those people from asking questions and seeking truth. That's what censorship really fundamentally means. And I think trans censorship, trans Orwellianism, the trans clampdown on anyone who uses the wrong pronouns or who asks the wrong questions, that is fundamentally about preventing people from arriving at the truth. And that is why I think it's so incredibly important to challenge every form of censorship that is used by these people. The final point I want to make is in relation to the term phobia, because that's one of the key aspects here. Everyone in this room, presumably, at some point will have been referred to as transphobic, or certainly will be thought of as transphobic. And that phobia term is such a key aspect of the current new form of censorship. So not only are trans critical feminists referred to as transphobic, but also anyone who raises any questions about Islam, for example, particularly radical Islam, is referred to as Islamophobic. So you can be a feminist raising questions about the way in which some Muslim men force women to cover their faces in public, which I think is barbaric and horrendous. And you are Islamophobic for asking those questions. You're Islamophobic for raising those problems. On the other side of the spectrum, I imagine lots of the people here will disagree with Christians who are opposed to gay marriage, for example, who are opposed to same-sex marriage. But I think we should agree that the branding of them as homophobic plays the same role. That's also about silencing them. That's also about saying your ideas are beyond the pale and should no longer have any expression in the public sphere. And of course, anyone who raises questions about mass immigration, I'm generally in favour of immigration. My parents were immigrants, so I wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for immigration. But anyone who raises the issue, questions about mass immigration is referred to as xenophobic. So the way in which the phobia tag is paraded around and used to brand people as basically unacceptable witches, people we shouldn't listen to, is something we need to be really consistent about. And I think that the final point I want to make on freedom of speech is the most important element of freedom of speech is consistency. So you have got to defend it for everyone. That's in the very nature of the term. If you're only defending it for people you agree with, that's not freedom of speech. That's privileged speech, because you're defending the speech of certain people. You've got to defend it for everyone. And that means we've absolutely got to defend the freedom of speech of so-called TERFs, who I think are one of the most abused intellectual groups in contemporary society. We've also got to defend freedom of speech for those fucking idiots, if you'll excuse my language, who hold candlelit vigils and calling me a mass murderer, and who stand outside meetings like this, although they're not here today, calling you all TERFs and witches and everything else. We've got to defend their freedom of speech too. So the key aspect to all of this is that it's in the interests of those who believe in truth, who believe that women are women and men are men, and if you don't like it, then you can bugger off. People who believe in that kind of truth have got to defend freedom of speech, because in the words of John Milton, if you put truth and falsehood in battle in the public sphere, truth will always win.
Thank you very much, Brendan. As you may note, and it often happens with our talks, the live stream has gone a bit weird. So do bear with. We've got another copy that will be uploaded after this event. We now have Olly Lambert, who...
Yeah, straight away, sorry. There you go.
like some water?
Olly is a documentary filmmaker.
Yep.
Is that working? I'll give you my mic.
Yeah, hello.
Okay, hello. So here's Olly Lambert, everybody.
Right. Hi there. Sorry for my late arrival. Long story, which I won't share here, but so I've missed a large part of what's happened, what's come before. So excuse if I'm repeating things that have been said. So I just want to tell you a story, to be honest. This is the story of a film that I made last year called Trans Kids, It's Time to Talk. I'm talking about so it'll be help me to know which direction to go with this. Could you just raise your hand if you saw it? I'm not offended. Oh my God, that ruins half of my talk. Okay, well, this is a story of the sort of behind the scenes of the making of that film. To sort of refresh my memory a couple of nights ago, I thought I'd better just go back through my notes, of which there are copious amounts to deal with the sort of nuclear level fallout of that film. And by the time I'd finished my notes, I was sort of shaking with what actually took place. So I'd sort of put it out of my mind. So I just want to go through what happened in that process and to explain a little bit how it began and what it became. Because in a way, there was a much more important film that could have been made about the making of that film. So just to explain who I am and what I do. So I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I've made about 50 films for the BBC and Channel 4 over the last 20 years. And the way that it normally works for talented directors, unlike myself, is that I would come up with a brilliant idea, and that gets commissioned. The way that I work is that other people come up with brilliant ideas, and I make them. So after the birth of my first little boy, about 18 months ago, I took some time off and I didn't really want to take on any projects. But I got a call from a friend of mine who was a sort of senior producer at a production company. And she said, I know you're taking time off work, but I've got this really simple film you could do. It's like, honestly, Olly, I know you want to take some time. It's just going to be 12 days filming, a bit of pre-production, 6-week edit, bosh, great. So money in the bank. I thought, you know what, that's probably a really good thing to do. Then she explained that it's going to be a film about transgender children and the huge rise in transgender children who are sort of seeking treatment at the Tavistock Centre and what the implications of this were for society and the intersection with sort of feminist rights. And to be honest, my first thought was, doesn't sound like my bag at all. I've got no skin in any of those games. It's not something that I've really engaged with. It's not a story I've really followed. My gut instinct was, kids want to be trans, let them be trans. If women want rights, let them have rights. We should all have rights. So very live and let live. What's the problem here, guys? So I actually originally said no to it. And then my friend emailed again. She said, look, just check out this little taster tape that we've done. It's an interview with the person who'd be the presenter of this film. And I watched a 3-minute clip of an interview with the Irish psychotherapist and author Stella O'Malley. And I was blown away by this woman. She was sharp, she was articulate, she was funny, she asked some really good questions, and she had that therapist's air of someone who wanted to be challenged and wanted to challenge. And I immediately liked her, and she told this crazy story, which is that when she was a kid, as you probably remember from the film, she totally identified as a boy. She didn't just think she should be a boy or wanted to be a boy, she thought she was a boy. And she would beat up anyone who said any different. And Stella made a really good point in this little film. She said, if I'd been growing up today, I'm absolutely convinced I would have transitioned. And I'm absolutely convinced that would have been a huge mistake. I thought that is a brilliant starting point. What a journey that woman could go on, and what a revealing journey that could be, way beyond her own personal experience. So I met up with Stella, thought she was fantastic, and I thought this could be a really interesting film. Let's put her in, to really break it down into binaries. There's a mass simplification, but in simple terms, let's make Stella meet and interact with in a kind of long conversations to go and meet a number of people, maybe 8 or 10 people, from the full range of the spectrum of points of view on this. From the most radical feminist sort of anti-trans voice to someone like the representatives from Mermaids who think you should absolutely affirm and enforce and all those things. And I thought that would be a really interesting journey to go on. Now, The only people that we approached right from the start were two people. Was Helen Weberly, who is, as I'm sure a lot of you know, is the only private sort of gender GP. I think she markets herself as. And yes, more later. And we also approached Polly Carmichael at the Tavistock Clinic. Both of these women said, do you know what, that sounds quite interesting, let's stay in touch, we'd like to be involved, let us know when the filming gets going. You know, it was very like an open door, let's talk about it. We decided early on in the production process to actually break it very much into two halves. We felt, rightly or wrongly, that I'm going to use these terms around, I don't actually like them, but the pro-trans lobby would be able to put much more pressure on the gender-critical lobby to get them to pull out of the film, than the other way around. So we approached all the gender-critical voices first, purely for that reason, and we thought when that filming's in the bag and they can't be deterred, then we would open it up to people like Mermaids and Stonewall and the much more sort of pro-trans voices. We began filming. We filmed with Debbie Hayton, who was amazing. That was the first day's filming. I filmed with James Caspian. I filmed with Gender Critical Dad, the blogger, the secret meet-up in a shopping centre up north. Brilliant. And all was going well. And we were literally, I think it was the very day that we sent our first approach email to Susie Green at Mermaids and to Stonewall, I think was the same day, we got this message that someone had emailed someone from Channel 4. And I said, who did they email from Channel 4? Oh, well, it was the director of programmes at Channel 4. The most important person at Channel 4 had been approached with an email from an organisation called All About Trans. And the email said, I thought this was a great idea. They said they wanted to make sure the documentary was well received, informed and interesting. I thought, brilliant, so we can really engage with these people. We don't approach them, they're already approaching us, it's great. Obviously, the director of programmes deferred it to the head of factual, who deferred it to the head of documentaries, who deferred it to the executive producer, who said, you should probably talk to Olly, he's the director. No, we want to meet with the director of programmes, the commissioning editor for all documentaries, and the executive producer, and the director. But that's what they wanted. And that didn't seem to me like engagement, that felt to me like an attempt to control. And that's very different. To cut a long story short, it seemed that All About Trans were actually gatekeepers and working very closely with Susie Green. So, very long story, but we ended up having a conference call with Susie Green, who set out her extensive reasons why she wouldn't take part in the film. Firstly, she was deeply offended that she hadn't been approached first, and actually just couldn't understand why they hadn't been approached first. I explained that the order of filming is not a measure of someone's importance. In fact, quite the contrary. Often you do leave the most important interview to the end. And actually, I felt that way with Susie Green, to be honest. I think she was one of two people. I thought her and Polly Carmichael would be the most interesting people to speak to about this issue. Certainly the most interesting people for Stella to meet. However, she'd heard who we'd filmed, and she didn't like them. So that was not really. She also, this is a big one, she didn't like some of the people that Stella followed on Twitter. And then she said, and she really didn't want to take part because she felt she wasn't going to take part because she felt the film was going to be one-sided. So I explained that by not taking part, she was making that more likely. She then explained that Stella was not, quote, not qualified to ask these questions because even though she had an experience where she firmly identified as a boy, she didn't actually transition. So I think what she meant was she's the wrong kind of trans. She's the wrong kind of gender questioning person. She also said, as someone who has no medical qualifications and has never met Stella, but had read an article that she'd written a year earlier, that it was clear to her that Stella had not been gender dysphoric and was confused. Now, Well, that struck me. That is my first little real red alarm bell, because I thought the thing that I'm being accused of most in this kind of sphere is that somehow I'm degrading the validity of transgender children and their experience. And yet it was precisely that argument that was used against me and Stella to say that experience that she had is not valid. I mean, literally not valid. And that voice can't be heard, and that person is not allowed to ask those questions. Now, she had a very interesting experience, and at the end of this conversation, that was pretty tetchy, to be honest, she did agree to let us potentially meet some of the children, or young people, at Mermaids, off camera, with Stella, to just sort of get a sense of where they're coming from. And we thought that was a great idea, fantastic. I said, why don't you let us film it, keep the rushes. If you hate us, you can keep the rushes forever. If it goes well, and I think you'll like Stella, she's a good person, and she asks good questions, and if this is something you're passionate about, I'm sure you've got great answers. I genuinely believe that, let's hear them. Then let us film it or not, doesn't matter, but let's get the ball rolling. Fine, she said. 3 days later, Susie informed us that having discussed Stella with a young person at Mermaids who had read this article Stella had written a year earlier, and this person was, quote, super smart, so there we go, they had decided, as Mermaids, to have no part in this film whatsoever, and they were going to actively discourage anybody else from taking part. And that was from the most influential advocate of trans children in the United Kingdom, refusing and actively discouraging people from taking part in a documentary about trans children. A documentary that, as we explicitly said, was about questioning whether or not we are doing the right thing by kids, and can we be sure we're not doing any harm. That's the question. That is a question that could not be asked. I had to sort of really do a sort of double take at that point, because usually when making documentaries, people with interest groups, advocacy groups, campaign groups, usually kind of fall over themselves to take part in the film. That's the problem, is explain to people why they can't take part. But here we had the most influential, probably the most influential organisation, advocacy group for trans children, would not take part in a documentary in prime time on Channel 4 that would ask a question about the best treatment of transgender children, or children who identify as the opposite sex. I've made films for about 20 years. I've never come across anything like that, anything close. I've just finished a film about the Arab-Israeli conflict that went out on Monday night. This is a film about Gaza and Israel. I've spent weeks toing and froing to Gaza, and I've met with the leaders of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Israel Defense Forces. All of them said, I had a conversation with Khalil al-Hayya, the deputy head of Hamas in Gaza, and he said, are you talking to the Israelis? I said, yeah, I am, of course I am. And I've got some really good questions for them. The chief spokesman of the Israel Defense Forces, a guy called Jonathan Conricus, asked me who I was talking to in Gaza. I said I'm talking to Khalil al-Hayya and also Khalid al-Bach, the leader of Islamic Jihad. Oh. That'll be interesting. Compare that with my conference call with Susie Green. Now, I'm going to run, sorry, how are we doing for time? Honestly, I could talk about this for weeks. So after Mermaids pulled out, strangely, Helen Weberly immediately pulled out. Got a message from her agent.
Oh.
A message from her agent saying that she wouldn't take part. And it was round about then, we've been speaking to Helen for months, right? It's never been a problem, she was out. It's round about then we heard there's a WhatsApp group going around with all sorts of everyone being told, don't go near it, it's transphobic, don't go near it. I had to really interrogate myself, am I doing the right thing here? Because I'm only doing what I've been doing for like nearly 20 years. Yeah. It's like, what's the right way of doing this? What's the best way? Are we sure it's good? What's really going on here? I've never come across something like this. Helen Weberly, eventually, we tried to, come on Helen, you're out there, you're a public figure, you really believe passionately in what you do. I don't doubt that for a minute. I don't know why you believe in it so passionately, but I'd love to hear. Stella's an interesting person, she's got a sparky mind, so have you. I just about got Stella to have a phone call with Helen Weberly. It was an appointment, really. And Stella and I sat in a car in Dublin, and Stella called Helen. They actually had a really good chat. I think within a few minutes, Helen realised, oh, okay, this person isn't actually an arsehole. They actually asked some good questions. I've got some good answers. And she was saying, okay, well, potentially I can see how this might work, but I've got a condition. I said, okay, what's your condition? The condition is I'll take part in this documentary as long as you do not film two particular people. I overheard this because it was on a mobile. And Stella said, who are these two people? I have never had anyone say that to me in a documentary in nearly 20 years. Never. No one has ever laid a condition down like that. Certainly people said, I really prefer you not to. You know, I don't agree with that. I think they're wrong. All sorts of reasons. No one's ever laid it down as a condition. So, okay, who are these crackpot nut jobs that we can't interview? And those people were the MP David Davis and Stephanie Davis-Arai. All of this sounded profoundly dodge. And Stella was a bit kind of taken aback. I don't think she quite clocked how unusual that was. This is the first time she's been involved in a documentary. So then she said, okay, I don't think we're actually planning on speaking to those people. Is there anybody else we can't speak to? And Helen said, I can't tell you offhand, there's a little list. I immediately got in touch with Stephanie Davis-Arai, who we had been talking to, and for reasons which I'll be quite open about, that Stephanie's position was so similar in many ways to Stella's that actually it felt like it wouldn't be grist to the mill, really. It would be two people agreeing with each other, and I don't think much would have come of that. In fact, Stephanie probably would have made a very good presenter of this film herself. So we'd kind of thought, well, of all the people, if we're selecting our sort of 9 or 10 people, we'd actually ruled Stephanie out. With a deep respect and apologies to Stephanie, but I know in this in greater cause, I immediately sprinted up to London, because I live in Brighton, to meet with Stephanie and to say, what the hell is this about? And Stephanie was rightly very put out about this, and I had to explain the context to it all. We never did find out who else was on the little list, but curiouser and curiouser. The other thing in that conversation with Helen Webley I forgot is that Helen took the view that actually there are some things that are so bad they can't be talked about, and probably forgetting that the person she was speaking to was A, a psychotherapist, who B, had lived through the Troubles in Ireland. And Stella said very clearly she fundamentally disagreed, and actually if there's a problem, you talk about it and you talk about it and you talk about it, and in her brilliant phrase, you put the dead dog on the table, she said. Anyway, who thinks that Helen Webley pulled out? She did pull out. Well done. What a surprise. Now, we then started a bit of a problem because we're slowly running out of people. So I thought, I know who'll speak to me. Surely a member of Parliament, a member of the government who's had sort of profound impact through their work on, say, changes to the Gender Recognition Act. So we approached Maria Miller. Dear Maria, my producer Danielle wrote to Maria Miller and said, we'd love you to take part in this documentary, explain exactly what it was, it's by the presenter who identified as this person. And, we didn't hear back. Wrote again. Actually, she's really busy in the next, she's actually really busy at the minute. Okay, anytime, just an hour, at your convenience, anywhere in the UK, anytime in the next 4 weeks. No, too busy. You've got an hour anytime in the next 3 months. No, too busy. At that point, I said, come on, Maria. And I wrote her to her director. I said, Maria, I'm amazed you're not taking part in this. I'm offering you just a 10-minute window, anytime in the next 3 months to take part in this film. If you don't want to take part, please can you inform me of your reasons why? Because I just cannot believe that the real reason for you not taking part is because your diary is full. I just don't buy it. She then wrote back personally, not her, and she said she hadn't. This is all her work with the Women Equality Select Committee was 2 years ago, and that she had no involvement in the issue. And she suggested that I speak to someone, quote, in government.
What?
And it reminded me of this sketch I saw when I was a kid in the Not 9 O'Clock News, where someone replied, "I'm sorry, this really has got nothing to do with me. So she pulled out saying she had nothing to do with it whatsoever, no longer anything to do with this issue. 2.5 hours later, I was forwarded an email that was circulating amongst MPs in Westminster. The opening line of this invitation was said, "You are invited to," quote, "an afternoon panel event on trans equality held in partnership with Maria Miller." I wrote to Maria, I sent this invitation to her, I said, look, I find it really hard to square your email with this email. And would you provide me with the real reason why you don't want to take part? And Maria didn't reply. So then I thought, okay, let's approach Stonewall. Should we Stonewall what I've got something to say on this? So emails to Ruth Hunt went unanswered, and eventually I got the chief press officer from Stonewall on the phone. I was with everyone. I got my spiel about the film. This is a 1 hour-long documentary, Channel 4, presenter, identified as male when young and now as a woman, and is content with that, asking questions about whether we are can we shorten up doing any harm. And she listened very carefully and then started sort of asking some questions, good questions, clearly from a different point of view. She said, are you speaking to people who have gender critical points of view? I said, yes, absolutely. I named a couple of the people who had already filmed, and she thought about that for a bit. And then I got an email back 2 days later saying that Stonewall would be taking no part in this, as we would be, quote, debating identities, which would be, quote, extremely damaging. And they didn't want to be in a film that would include, quote, gender critical voices who, quote, do not believe that young people should be allowed to explore their identity. From what I gathered, some speakers in your film put forward a gender critical approach, which ultimately denies the existence of trans people. Now, apart from anything, it's just monumentally stupid. And I wrote back and said there is I slightly changed my phrase, it's a monumental crossed wire. And I said we're not remotely discussing the existence of trans people. We've just been filming with them and they're great. We just want to talk about the process. And in her email she said, contact me if you have any questions. Obviously my email got an auto response that she was on holiday and calls went unanswered. What about Owen Jones? That would be a good one. I was like punishing myself. Who else can reject me? Owen, you can reject me. So I wrote to Owen. Owen didn't reply. So I wrote to Owen again. He didn't reply. And I wrote again, and this time he didn't reply. So I wrote to my friend who works at The Guardian, and I said, look, this is the situation. I know you through documentaries. I'd love to get in touch with Owen. I think this would be an interesting film. Yeah, there's voices that he won't agree with. That's the point. Owen meets with people he doesn't agree with all the time, you figure. So what about meeting someone and talking about this issue? Email came back. I've got some questions. Are there any trans people in the production team? I said, well, the production team's like 3 people, so no. And also, come to think of it, I've made films about heroin addiction, domestic Nigerian family life, about the war in Iraq. I've never been asked, well, you're not really Iraqi enough to talk about the war crimes. The idea that a journalist or a filmmaker has to somehow have some profound identification with the subject that they're looking into is totally absurd. And I said, no, there isn't someone who's trans on the production team. It'd be great if there were, but actually that would make it a very different film. It's a subjective film. You could argue, actually, that Stella identified as trans, in some sense, but that's, I forgot, that's not the good trans, it's the bad trans. So there were a few other questions, and then he said he couldn't make any promises, and I didn't hear back from Owen. Paris Lees. Paris Lees. So a friend of mine, a very senior guy at Channel 4, is actually quite good friends with Paris Lees, and said, I'll put you in touch. He put me in touch. He said, Olly is a really good guy, he makes really good films, you can trust him. Olly, Paris is great, I think she's brilliant, don't agree on everything, she's brilliant. Spoke to Paris, I said, let's meet up and chat about it. We arranged to meet. On the morning of the meeting, she cancelled. So I said, okay, let's do it again in a few days' time. Fine, we arranged to meet again. Morning of that, she cancelled. Too busy, can't talk to you. Okay, so Justine Greening. That's a boring one, that's just no answer. Jake Graff wouldn't even speak to me on the phone. Alex Bertie didn't respond. Gender Intelligence didn't respond. It just went on, and I think at the end of it, actually, by the end of it, we're quite bruised because you sort of interrogate yourself as to what are we doing that is so profoundly wrong? And we really couldn't get to the bottom of it.
They're gangsters.
Gangsters.
A bunch of gangsters.
It's a point of view. So we did actually film with some very, very, really lovely, brilliant, articulate trans people. Two sort of trans guys in their early 20s. We also filmed with Debbie Hayton. There was someone who detransitioned at the end of the film. There's Stella herself. There was a young girl who wanted to transition to being a boy, was being treated at the Tavistock. I mean, and the young trans guys were fascinating because they were sort of, neither of them had any particular relationship with Stonewall or the sort of lobby groups. Actually, one of them did have quite a lot of relationship with mermaids and Stonewall, and doesn't anymore, which is interesting. But they were very thoughtful. They were sort of unpolluted by actually a lot of this doctrine. So they would acknowledge, yeah, it's not easy. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I knew nothing about it when I began it, but I still think it's the right thing to do. It's not a quick fix. You know, it doesn't. They would articulate the idea that once you've transitioned, it's not like it solves a problem, but it's the beginning of a new kind of journey, which brings with it problems, but it still feels better than what it was. But this is really easy. I mean, why can't we just have that conversation? Because they're clearly able to articulate the nuances of this out of a black and white sort of binary position. Interestingly, one of those people who we filmed, in the days before broadcast, was approached by Stonewall and they wanted to offer him support. And he said, no, I'm fine. I don't know the details of the conversation, but I know that they were sort of very keen to understand the distress that he was going through. And when he pointed out actually that he wasn't distressed and that he'd seen the film and he thought it was really good, that was which began the process of him completely cutting all ties with Stonewall. So I think there's nothing to, then it made me think, well, there's nothing to be afraid of here. These are all sort of really sort of valid conversations to be having. And I haven't really got any conclusions to all of this, other than to say that it was one of the most extraordinary experiences in terms of the process of making the film. I've never encountered such a sort of targeted, coordinated campaign against a film that was genuinely seeking to ask valid questions about the treatment and the health of children, and the idea that that would be completely kind of enclosed and accused of being transphobic and some kind of hate speech. It's quite extraordinary. In fact, Stella, I'll end by saying this, that when we were going through all this process, and it was just getting it on air was just a complete car crash, and it was a miracle. I couldn't write the relief when I saw the opening sequence just run. So I thought we were never going to get there. In the middle of all this, Stella said to me, is this normal? Does this normally happen? I said, no, Stella, this never happens. This is so unusual. And she said, but why this? Why is this one more difficult? In these, let's say, these two sides, why is it so difficult for one side to engage with this conversation? And at that time, I was toing and froing to Gaza and Israel, making this film that was dealing with these very, probably the most polarised political positions on the planet. And I said, it is odd because both those sides are talking to me, and both those sides know the other side's talking to me. And the only reason that I can come up with is that you'll always speak to a journalist, no matter who else they're talking to. You'll always speak to them if you feel absolutely sure that you're right. And that was all I could say.
So we'll go to the Q&A. We've got something to watch.
I was going to show a clip, but you've all seen the film, so I didn't bother. But I've got an outtake from the clip. Oh, Ben, I've got an outtake. Ben, get ready with the short clip. So,
okay. This is, as you've all seen the film, you all probably remember the event that Venice organised at Bristol, where there was the plan for a, you remember it, there was and Posie was there. Anyway, you've seen that, it was a huge kind of, it was quite a clash.
There was one bit of interview with one of the protesters outside, which I was desperate to put in the film, and I just couldn't get it in for all sorts of reasons. I'm going to share with you a little outtake, which I don't want filmed, if that's okay. A little outtake. An outtake from the film We Need, the trans film, Trans Kids We Need to Talk. So ready when you are, Ben. This might take a while.
Has he replied?
Oh, I don't know. I thought you talked to him.
Okay.
I turned it off. That's fine.
Hello? So it's not the is it?
Hello, Ben. Can you? It's Olly. Olly to Ben. Come in, please. That's okay. No one noticed. If you could just play the short clip and then the short clip in the Brighton talk folder, that would be great.
Sorry, I'm having some trouble getting your label set.
It's a conspiracy. The event is on.
You're watching Woke News on WLRN. This is the pleasure of live streaming. Panel's having some technical difficulties. Stay tuned. We'll be resuming as soon as possible.
Are we abandoning it?
I think abandoned would be like.
Not going to abandon Meghan.
We'll try and work out the clip later. It is quite funny.
Well, apparently when you switch the lights Hello. Brilliant. Oh, yours is
Hello.
Hello.
All right, so we've abandoned that, which is it's been the technical error.
We'll try and work it out afterwards. It's only 30 seconds, but it is quite funny. I keep saying how funny it is. It's a really fatal mistake.
So, as the chair, I don't mind running around with the microphone. Oh! Right, can I remind you, please do not record this. Please do not film this.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben, when you're ready, mate. When you're ready, Ben! Go on, Ben. Ready when you are, Ben.
That's the light sign. Just press play.
Just press that play button, Ben. Oh, there's no sound. Working on it. Can you get rid of that picture because it's really doing my head in?
Get rid of what? Oh, God, Ben.
Just while we're waiting, I'll talk without mic because they don't work when the lights are off or something. It's like me not being able to hear when I don't have my glasses on. But apparently, we booked this room until the end of the thing was supposed to be at 3. And when I arrived today, they went, "Oh, Avengers Endgame starts at 3 in that screening." So when we do finish, which will be a bit early, maybe 22 or 1:45 to allow everybody to get out, could you just please make sure you just leave? Because we'll have a conversation outside of this.
And we've booked the jury's in bar by the station.
Yeah, so the jury's in by the station is where we booked, so everybody can go and have a drink. But it will be quite important. They said, well, you know, the trailer starts ring. I was like, oh God. So yes, I don't think they do conferences here very often, but I think it's an excellent venue. I think it's just a few tweaks, but I think it's an excellent venue. Is this ready now? Is it good?
How are you doing up there, Ben?
It's 30 seconds of that. So slick, don't you think slick?
There's a...
It's like a 15 second clip. Should we just leave it? Right. Okay. Should we just do lights up? If he gets it, we can just put it on at the end or something. Put it out. Yeah, we do. Right. Okay, I'm going to make a request. When I do the questions, if you could raise your hand. A question would be preferable to a very long statement. You know, is it as important because we now only have about 40 minutes. Okay, so I'll come round. If you want to address your question to someone in particular, please do. But make it questions, please.
Thank you, Posie. And this is a quick and genuine question. All of us were horrified when transgender, which one was it, was taken down, and another WordPress.com site were taken down. Can anyone give me any update whatsoever on where we are with reinstating the excellent materials on those sites, and in general trying to get WordPress.com to stop being so stupid?
Is that microphone on? Did any of you like to do you want to answer, Jo?
I would if I knew.
Meghan, do you know if you like it?
I thought Gender Trender started a new site. I don't know what it's called though, but I think that... Okay, cool. Yeah, and that's all the info I have. I don't know any more details about what happened with WordPress or that site.
The archive, which is the most valuable thing, where any court settlement is still to go up.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for answering that question.
Right, hold on to that.
It's been wonderful to. Can you hear me? It's been wonderful to hear Meghan. I said, oh, we just get that.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Meghan, you said that you thought in general journalists in the UK were better than in Canada. I'm sure you're right, and it's a nice compliment to the few journalists who are probably here today. But I just wondered if anybody from the BBC had contacted you, because I'd like to point out the BBC now has a gender and identity correspondent and an LGBT correspondent. They don't actually have a crime correspondent, a children's health correspondent, a climate change correspondent, a women's issues correspondent, a BA/ME correspondent, but they have two correspondents who cover these issues. And I wondered if you've been contacted by either of them.
No, I haven't. This is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I did. I talked to someone from the Sunday Times and the Scotsman and
Sunday Times is fine.
And got a couple more.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, of course, it's not perfect. Of course, there's still problems with the media coverage here in terms of this trans trend. But yeah, Canada is just awful. Like it's so appalling to me that the CBC, again, our national public broadcaster, will not even acknowledge what feminists are doing and saying, and that there is a feminist critique of this issue at all. It's so dishonest and so cowardly.
I just wanted to ask you, Meghan, without revealing any of your agenda, what kind of legal fight back or actions you see the possibility of happening in Canada? Because it seems so bleak. what's happened with you, with the feminist movement in Canada?
Like,
is there some way you can go legally to fight back now?
I mean, not that I'm aware of, but I mean, there's been no court cases around this issue yet. So the law in Canada is still pretty vague. Like, so Bill C-16, which was our gender identity legislation, incorporated gender identity into the Human Rights Code and the Criminal Code. But, you know, it's all very vague. Gender identity itself is very vague. It's still undefined. You know, this is what I keep saying over and over. And it's like, who is trans? Like, who are we talking about? How are we defining this group? What do you mean when you say a transgender person? Like, it could just literally be any. I could just say I'm trans, and then I'm trans. You know, it doesn't mean anything. So we have these vague laws based on vague concepts, and you know, really, what happened in Canada was just that all these policies started being implemented across the country with no public consultation at all, no public debate. So, you know, trans people are just allowed to, men are just allowed to use women's washrooms, change rooms, etc. There's only one transition house left in Canada, Vancouver Rape Relief, that still has a woman-only policy. Everyone else is caved. I mean, obviously, you can't get funding or grants unless you go along with this. So I sort of understand why, but it's quite bad. And yeah, the fact that no one's even allowed to discuss it and that the media won't cover it is quite terrifying to me. So yeah, I don't know what our recourse is, and unfortunately in Canada there's not that many people who are speaking up. I mean, that's the other thing that's really impressive about the UK is that there's so many feminists here. I mean, you guys are doing such incredible work and activism, and there's more than one group fighting back on this issue. So good job.
Thank you. Right, Julia Long?
It's not a question, but I think it needs to be said. It's very gratifying to hear the members of the panel, and including seeing when Posie was up there, talking about the importance of naming men as men, because I think several of you agree. I have challenged you about that in the past when you were all calling them she, and so it's really gratifying now in this hall to hear the recognition of the importance of naming men as men. Olly, I think you're a little bit maybe late to the party. You missed some of the earlier talks, but hopefully you'll get up to speed because it's very, very important. It's the most crucial thing. At each point, when I and other women have pointed that out, we have always met, and now you, no doubt yourselves, are also meeting with resistance on that. And I've been told that I'm toxic, that I'm divisive, that I'm trying to rip apart the feminist movement, blah blah blah. So it's really great that some of the people maybe who've told me that in the past are now actually saying it. So I hope that's going to be a reminder to all of us that that is if we do nothing else, that is the most important thing we can do. But just very quickly, Brendan, I wanted to come to you on what you were saying and the whole title of this talk, which is about something about censorship and sensitivities. Now, I think we have to be very, very clear that when we're talking about these so-called sensitivities, that it's, you know, lots of what we're seeing with, well, everything that we're seeing about this transgender movement is a whole series of what, you know, Mary Daly and other people have called reversals. So what appear to be sensitivities, as we are now, I'm sure, all aware, are not sensitivities at all. It's a different incarnation of force, of patriarchal force. So what gets masked as a sensitivity, like, oh, I'm too fragile to be called he or to be called this, you've got to call me they or ze or she or, you know, whatever it is. All of these sensitivities come with the full force of patriarchy behind them. And if we think that this movement is different to other, as you were saying, identitarian movements, what I see is that it's totally consistent with every other form of patriarchal force that has ever driven a witch hunt, ever led a witch hunt against women. And I work on the femicide census, which is where we document the killing of women by men. And when women say no to men, when women assert our boundaries in relation to male access to us, then very often what happens to, you know, 150 women, well, maybe not all of them were killed in this particular context, but when women say no to men, that very often actually they kill us. When a woman says to a man that she is leaving him, we know that those first 3 months of her planning to leave is when he's going to kill her. So that's what we're talking about. Obviously, all of us here who have stood up to this are all collectively women saying no, and now we've got this threat that actually is about killing our whole movement and killing our right to language and culture and everything. So I think it's really important that we observe and understand what we're calling sensitivities is actually force, and it is quite consistent with all the other patriarchal forms of force that women have been subjected to over the years. Sorry, that's not a question.
Hi, this is for Olly. Do you think there's any scope for more documentaries to be made around this topic? I'm thinking specifically about the autism issue around trans, because I think that really, really needs to be highlighted.
Yeah, the connection between children who identify as trans and autism is staggering. I have to say that without saying too much, how can I put this? The difficulty of getting that film on air at Channel 4 was off the charts, you know. I mean, even when the film was finished, there were complications, sort of legal and also not legal, within Channel 4 about putting it out, and the hoops that we as a production and as a channel had to jump through to kind of create a space where that film was okay to be broadcast. That was a huge mountain to climb. I mean, it was yeah, I mean, I was sleeping on sofas in London to try and get it finished, and with lawyers all over me, and people in the channel saying it was, who saw it before broadcast, saying it was the most transphobic thing they'd ever seen, ever. And so, obviously, I just fundamentally disagree with that, and most people on the production did, and just were baffled by statements like that. I think there's not an appetite for that kind of fight. I mean, it's really difficult to do. Forget for any channel or platform, it's not an easy environment to sort of air stuff, and this is very, very, very challenging. You know, one thing, I forgot to mention that Polly Carmichael and Tavistock were poised to take part, and then felt that they couldn't, partly because of the sort of debacle over the sort of trans debate that happened on Channel 4 that was unhelpfully like a couple of weeks before we were supposed to be broadcasting. But actually, Polly Carmichael, or the press team at the Tavistock, actually gave the best reason of anyone to not take part, which was simply that whatever they said would be weaponised by one side or the other. And I thought that's a pretty fair comment, actually, in that their prime concern was the welfare of the young people in their care. And they felt that ultimately what was going to be gained for those people with this being even more inflamed, on a grand, I mean, one could argue that there's a lot to be gained in the grand scheme of things, but for those kids and young people, the best case scenario would be that things stay the same. And so they pulled out for that reason. I mean, I'm disappointed in it, but I can see her point. The short answer is I think it's very difficult. I think it's a very, very difficult climate to enter into. I had friends of mine within both Channel 4 and at BBC, when they heard that I was doing that trans film, I mean, people who were sort of war reporters, actually 2 war reporters messaged me and said, "Shit, you're brave." So yeah, that's the climate, and all one can do is kind of shift that open window a bit and say, no, it's not a bad question to be asking, actually, and there's no such thing as a bad question. But it's difficult. You know, everyone, you've got to go in with both feet and be prepared for a very, very long haul.
I think we've got a duty of care to stand up for autistic people.
Yeah, I totally agree. What I'm saying is that I think making a film about autism is I think there's there's no problem with that. I think there's often been, there's very good documentaries have been made and will continue to be made about autism. When you're seeing the correlation between autism and children who identify as transgender, and therefore the first response is going to be, you're saying being trans is a mental illness, and you're off. So yes, I agree there's a duty of care, but it's such a toxic climate to be fighting against. Sorry to not have a more positive answer.
Have any journalists or writers, bloggers, artists, anybody, anywhere in the world actually received a prison sentence so far for wrong speech on the trans issue? And if no, and if it happens in the future, what do you think are the chances of Amnesty International fighting back? That wasn't meant to be a joke, but it shouldn't be a joke, really. But do you think there is any chance? Are they persuadable, changeable? Oh, sorry. To anybody who might want to take that on the panel, I really don't mind.
Brendan, do you have something to say?
Not that I know of. I don't think anyone has been imprisoned for being trans skeptical, but people have been imprisoned for writing stuff in Europe or saying things, and I think that's something that we have to bear in mind. That's the point I was making about the importance of freedom of speech being consistent. I mean, a young man was imprisoned in Britain for 56 days for using the N-word on Twitter. Now, I think we can all agree the N-word is pretty repugnant, but the idea of imprisoning someone for 56 days for using it strikes me as far more repugnant. In Sweden, a Christian pastor was given a 1-month suspended prison sentence for describing homosexuality as a tumour on society. That strikes me as a far worse punishment than the thing he actually said. And of course, there was the woman in Austria who was charged and convicted of a hate crime for saying that Muhammad was a paedophile, which means Austria, in essence, and the European Union then defended her sentencing. Means that Austria has the same laws, in essence, as Pakistan or Saudi Arabia or anywhere else, except it just fines people rather than stoning them to death. So I do think if you don't want to see someone imprisoned for being trans-skeptical, I think it's important at this precise moment to argue against the imprisonment of people who are simply saying things, even if the things they're saying are pretty horrendous.
Yeah, I'm Harry Millen, Harry the Owl on Twitter. Also a fair call, thank you. On Wednesday, I had the privilege of being at the House of Lords and live tweeting Posie's event. I like to think that I reported accurately. I'm not experienced at live tweeting, but I think I reported accurately. I've been astonished at the backlash that I've received this week for using or for repeating the words that people in the House of Lords used. So, for instance, I retweeted that a mother had described her having a daughter, a beautiful daughter, who following transition became a bearded, mutilated, depressed, non-functioning man, in effect. And I've been censured and criticised for actually using the word mutilated. I've said, but that was the word that was used, and I was told I should have watered it down and I shouldn't have reported it. So my question to you is, should we water down our words, and should we be a little bit more sensitive? I don't think we should.
No, I don't think that we should water down our words. I think we have to keep telling the truth, and I think it makes it worse when we try to be nice. I mean, Julia's right that there was a lot of women who were telling the truth when others were not, and you know, the way to encourage and allow other people to start speaking out about this is to continue doing it. More and more of us need to do it. We need to do it under our own names. We need to do it publicly. I mean, I'm accused all the time of being mean and of being not empathetic, and I don't think I am being mean. I think I'm just saying what's true, but what's true is framed as hatred today. And I mean, in Canada, it's really easy for everyone to act like I'm the only one saying these things because it looks like I'm the only one saying these things. But of course, I'm not the only person in Canada who thinks this. It's just that everyone else is trying so hard to be nice and trying so hard to keep their friends and keep their jobs. Like, I get that it's scary. I'm not gonna pretend as though it's an easy thing to do. But I mean, we're losing this battle so quickly, and in Canada, I'm worried that it's lost, and no one's doing anything. And so the few of us that are pushing and are saying the truth are really at risk, you know? Like, this Auger person legit wants to have me, like, thrown in jail, and he's trying to take me to court. He hasn't succeeded, but he's not gonna stop trying. I can't be the only one who's saying this stuff in Canada. I mean, I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir, because again, you guys have been so great in the UK, but Canadians have been awful. So no, don't water it down. Don't try to be nice. Don't call men she.
Also, just to add to that, a really important point, it is mutilation. I mean, that's a really important point to bear in mind. You know, the Hippocratic Oaths, the first point of the Hippocratic Oath is first do no harm. If you are removing perfectly healthy body parts from people, that's incredibly harmful. I think we should say that. You know, in this country at the moment, there is real concern about female genital mutilation when it's done for religious reasons, but absolutely no concern whatsoever when it's done for supposedly trans reasons. But I think we really do have to start, if anything, far from softening our language or watering it down, we should actually up the ante and make it clear that society is in the grip of hysteria. This is a modern form of hysteria where very young people are being packed off to be chopped up and re-educated and mutilated, and that's a fact of life. And we're not saying it because we hate these people, we're saying it because we are deeply concerned for them. And I think that's the argument that we've got to start pushing even harder, probably, than we already have.
Terrible as it is for a chair to answer the question, I think it's actually a duty to talk in actual real terms, because every time an adult doesn't say she when it's a woman, or he when it's a man, or every time we go along with it, we basically pave the way for our children to have to put up with the idiocy of a man in a school calling himself a woman. And at a school near me, the teacher goes back after Christmas, nearly 60, as Miss, and all the children have to go along with that in a secondary school. And Debbie Hayton of Olly's documentary wrote guidance that says that actually children have to call that teacher by preferred pronoun, and that teacher has to go and use facilities that they so desire. So I think every time you go along with this, even a tiny weeny bit, and you don't tell the truth, you pave the way for other people to have to go along with the lies.
Well, I wanted to thank all the panel for fighting this issue, because it's very important for us all. And I wanted, I'm Spanish, so you're talking about some things that have happened in Canada with Meghan Murphy, and yeah, how the British women are fighting the proposals of legislation here in the UK, but this is an international problem. It's happening everywhere. So this is not just a thing in the United Kingdom. It's happening in New Zealand, and Annie O'Brien is talking about this. I've seen videos from women in Australia, also in the United States. There was this documentary from the Swedish television some weeks ago, and they were interviewing some doctor also in Norway. So this is going everywhere at this moment. And in Spain, we also have there's a new proposal of a bill, exactly the same of your gender recognition certificate or act, get the words mixed. It was the same, I think it was copied. So the lobby must have some meetings at an international level, because it was verbatim copy. It's a sort of a wish list. It is specifically said that they should go to prisons if they of their preferred gender if they commit a crime. That they should be allowed to take to participate in the sports of their preferred gender. So it's like a wish list, but a proposal of a bill. So my question is, are we organizing something globally the same as they seem to be doing? Because we should, because the union makes us more strong. So if we can show this is going everywhere at the same time, maybe we will be stronger. So I don't know how to do this, but we have to show this is going, because otherwise people think this is an issue in the UK, or maybe this is an issue in Canada. But it's happening at least in the Western world. The developing countries have different problems, but this is going everywhere. So are we doing anything like that? And maybe if you need to answer off camera, whatever, because I'm paranoid at this point. But it's a question and also a proposal.
Right. Can I let Sheila Jeffries, I don't know if you've heard of her, answer this question?
Thank you for asking that question, because of course it is international. I have been involved with, and Heather Brunskill-Evans, who's also here, has been involved with writing and promoting the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which is in opposition to the Yogyakarta Principles and all of those documents that say that men, if they've got a funny feeling in their willy when they're thinking about being a woman, actually are a woman and want to be in women's spaces, etc. Rights is it's womensdeclaration.com. You can find it online, you can sign on to it. We're looking for women in every country to be pushing it. We want a situation where, in any of the meetings around policy, where anybody's saying, oh, we've got to consider the Yogyakarta Principles, and we have someone here from Stonewall, the feminists will be able to say, no, there's a Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. Women absolutely have to be protected on their sex-based rights, and there is an alternative. So that's happening internationally, and I think we are beginning to get somewhere on that. But the other thing that I really wanted to say today as well, hearing all of this, is there's a layer of what we're not allowed to speak about, which is that this is not just a men's rights movement, it's a men's sex rights movement. I think everybody on the panel, Olly, Brendan, they know there's a huge amount of pornography about this. They know that there's men's in the women's toilets trying to actually acquire tampons with blood on them so they can stick them up their bottoms. There's men walking around in sanitary towels trying to pretend that they menstruate for sexual excitement. It's a men's sex-based rights movement. That's really, really, really clear out there. But the fact is, nobody's saying that. The children and what's happening to the children is collateral damage of a men's sex rights movement. Some of the anger that we see is the same sort of anger as when men defend their other sex-based rights to abuse women, which is pornography and prostitution and so on. So men get very, very angry about their rights, but I don't know why there's this silence on it, because everybody in the media must know what is happening online around this pornography. They must have a very good idea that when the 60-year-old man is going into the school saying, call me she, he is probably getting erections from that. He has been since he was 11 years old. It's a sexual thing for him. Is it too embarrassing when we're around these men dressed in dresses to actually say what they're doing, to talk about their erections and say, have you got one now? Right? Because they do. In the women's toilets, everywhere that they are with women, this is what they're doing. We are the unfortunate and unwilling audience that's being used for their sexual excitement. It cannot be said. So it's much more than, I'm terribly pleased that Posie said woman, adult, human, female, and it created such a stir. Fantastic! But can we actually say it's about their sexual excitements and getting erections? And when we'll be able to say that? Because at the moment we absolutely can't, and we have to.
Oh, hi. My name's Amanda. And I'm a psychotherapist. I spend most of my time helping people unpack their thoughts from their feelings. Okay? So what I want to know, similar to this question here, is are there other psychotherapists and other people who are psychologists who are willing and interested to form a group? Because there is something here about, Posie said adult human female, there's something about free speech that Brendan was talking about, but actually what is free speech? People are talking with authority and saying, I feel like a woman. What does a woman feel like? You can say, I feel unhappy, I feel upset with my body, I think there's something wrong, but actually, can you really say, I'm feeling like a woman? No. Woman is not a feeling. Is it, Posie? So that's what I'm interested in. Also, the lady who spoke there, I think it's Sheila, she's absolutely right about this men's sex rights movement, because I know from my work with women, and I know from my work with sexual predators, that they look for loopholes.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something here too. So I'm interested also in knowing who will want to form some kind of group with me, because we can speak with authority. I'm also a lecturer, an associate lecturer with a university. I spent 6 years as course lead as a teaching on a practitioner diploma, so there must be other people like me who are willing to have a voice. I'm not afraid. I have a very big practice. I'm not afraid.
So in our meeting on Wednesday, which was called First Do No Harm, the Ethics of Transgender Healthcare, we did have psychotherapists. We had David Bell, and we had some, I don't know what's going on with this, but there's definitely, I think there's a lot of fear as well in your profession that you're not allowed to question it and you have to affirm.
But we know, sorry, can I just say one more thing? When your thoughts and your feelings and your actions all match, you feel happy. It's really simple. And, you know, there's something about existing in a persona that we're seeing the promotion of this. You know, children are being taught that. Yes, to disassociate, that's right, from their bodies, from their feelings, from their own growing up, their identity confusion. You know, it's all this kind of thing.
Right, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 that I've seen. I'm just going to go to Heather and I'll come back to you. Okay. Should have worn a Fitbit or something. Heather.
Thanks. I'm directing this to you, Olly, actually. It was a statement you made about Polly Carmichael. And in the interest of truth, I think this truth needs to come out. That Polly Carmichael is actually a very good politician when she speaks in public and when she would speak to you, to say that what she's doing is protecting the children in her care. But at the very same time that she was saying that to you, the truth is that the Tavistock itself were having clinicians who were really disturbed about what was going on there. She was perfectly well aware of that. And the truth is that the Tavistock, or the Gender Identity Development Services for children, they are absolutely associated with mermaids, directly associated with mermaids. They promote mermaids material, they promote the material of gendered intelligence, and they go along with the central idea that there is such a thing as gender identity. So the Tavistock itself must never ever be let off the hook. They are instrumental in constructing the idea of the transgender child. And behind the scenes, Polly Carmichael is petrified of this movement. What she will do is pretend that she's reasonable. She's paid to do that. If I was in her position and if I believed in such a thing as transgender identity, I would probably say the same thing. But I don't believe in transgender identity. There are many people who don't. And the Tavistock is doing harm. We have to speak out about it.
go on, I just want to make one point. They lie about their whistleblowers. They actively tell lies. We have to call them out on this. Thank you.
Right, just one moment. I've got to...
Hi. I co-run a movement called Artists for Brexit. I'm not coming under that hat, but so I just want to make a couple of observations I've noticed in the year or two that we've been present. One of the two things I find, cause I'm a Brightonian born and bred, and one of the two things I find that people seem to give away once they've had a few pints is one, that they secretly wanted to vote leave, or they, or they did. And the other is I have a lot of discussions with women who, after a few pints, do note that their biggest worry is that their children are coming back to them saying they're being plied on drugs now, or they want to transition, and they're being, in some sense, being led a little bit. And so I just, it's kind of odd. I don't know, I feel like there's something going on in this city a lot. I mean, this city is great for a lot of things, but it's also, I feel an element of people repressing themselves as well. The book you want to read on this is it's called Ordinary Men. It sort of deconstructs how people can go from rational positions to ending up doing something quite horrible. So I just wanted to maybe...
Children in plain sight in Brighton.
Yeah.
It's a huge racket. You don't even read a book to know that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, fair enough.
Keep letting your politicians in.
Fair enough. It's a fair point. So it's very interesting to it's great to see this sort of turnout for this sort of discussion as well. Full solidarity with you lots.
Yeah, directly. Hello. I'm a mum living in Brighton, and my daughter is 7, and she's coming home about, boys in dresses, mummy. It's really funny. It's all right at the moment, but I'm a little bit concerned about when she goes into secondary school. I've spoken to some other mums who've said, their kids are kind of, it's a bit of a gap between the generations, it seems. I've got friends who have secondary school kids, you don't understand, you're old, this is a whole new thing, get with it, and I think it's really difficult once you kind of lose them. A lot of my mum friends have said, once they get into secondary school, whatever I say, it's just like, you don't understand, you're the older generation and this is our thing, and we're all sort of experimenting with our fluidity and all the rest of it. So, I'm just wondering, I don't know what, I don't really have a question, just a concern as a mum living in Brighton particularly, because of, what's going on here, and I just think it's, I'm teaching my daughter to be as critical and questioning and independent as possible. Anyway, that's just all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Hi, my name's Helen Saxby, and I've just written a children's rights impact assessment on the All Sorts Trans Toolkit here in Brighton. If anybody's interested, it's to be found on the Transgender Trend website, and it runs to 22 pages because it has to be very, very detailed. Our children are being indoctrinated. This trans toolkit has been in Brighton schools since 2013, and just last year there was a report from one secondary school that 40 children were not identifying as the sex that they were born. Since 2013, there's been plenty of time for those children to grow up with this gender indoctrination, and we're seeing the results now in Brighton. If you're concerned, go onto the Transgender Trend website, find the Children's Rights Impact Assessment, and complain to whoever you can find to complain to. We all need to get involved in this.
Right, I'm going to do the final question to Stephanie Davis-Arai.
Yeah, also children are being indoctrinated. If anybody would like the Transgender Trans Schools Guide, I've brought some with me today. So any parents who want one of these to take to their child's school, it is up to parents. Parents do have power. We also have a safeguarding concerns document, which you can also pick up from me today. But go onto the website or email us at info@transgendertrend.com. If you're a professional and want to get together with other professionals, also come and see me or email me and I'll put you in a secret group. So use transgendertrend.com, go onto the website, contact us. If you want to do any work with schools or in any area of the transitioning of children, we can put you in touch with people or we may have the answers ourselves. But do use that organisation because it's gaining a lot of power in schools across the country as parents start to challenge their schools and their local authorities.
We're going to try this film again. As we wait to see if Ben has sorted it out, can I just say a big thank you to Julie Birchall. And can I also, while she's an absolute joy and delight and determined woman, and I'm sure for many of us has been somebody we've looked up to for a really long time, the 2013 interview she did with Paris Lees is one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard. And I think at one point, I won't do your accent, it'd be a terrible impression, but she goes, "Oh, bitchy!" to Paris Lees. It's absolutely brilliant. And I think Paris talks about his hairdresser and how that's like a measure of him being a woman going to a hairdresser once a week. But do look it up. I think it might have been a Spectator. It was a Spectator. It's just an absolute delight. It's not there. It's not there. No, I listened to it not very long ago.
I'll do it for you.
Society are mature enough to have this as a legitimate conversation, because it's not a legitimate conversation. It's clearly not.
The conversation hasn't even happened yet inside.
Just give me a minute to think about what I'm going to say.
Now we're just going to have a little film, hopefully.
Oh, we got it.
Hopefully. Can we have the next one? Fingers crossed. Come on, Ben.
Come on, Ben. You can do it.
Just switching it over. Switch over, turning to the film.
Yay!
Is just too annoying. There's so much wrong with everything that he's producing. He's just taking ridiculous to a new level.
Hi. I'm non-binary. Which means I don't identify as a man or a woman.
Look, I'm just going to be honest, mate. The entire world looks at you and they identify a man. Doesn't matter how you
That's a gender non-conforming person who's making me uncomfortable because of my own insecurities. We know better about our own repressed desires.
So here Alok's presenting these two American version of posh young women as being the threat or the problem that gender non-conforming people are facing. Like 80% of violent crimes in the US are caused by male people, and this is a problem. Women, these two posh American girls, are you joking me?
Even though society encourages sexuality.
Alok, stop right there. I'm beginning to suspect you have no problems, Alok. What society encourages individuality? What is your video about? What's the problem you're trying to solve here if society encourages individuality? God's sake.
Non-binary people like me are punished for daring to divide conventions and be ourselves.
Now I'm just trying to figure out how Alok thinks he's being punished because like he looks pretty fucking smug to me.
Each one of these is what we call a dichotomy. And they are.
So this is the part where these identitarians decide they want to destroy the entire English language. I really urge anybody who questions what I'm saying right now to read a book called 1984. Because there's a whole section in that book describing what these people are doing, destroying the English language so that it has no meaning whatsoever and that we can't communicate. We're like animals just with no thoughts.
Convenient that a philosophy of the mind-body divide emerged at a time when Descartes' Enlightenment developed on the backs of exploited black and brown people in the global south. Because people of color just have bodies and not minds.
So now these people are just appropriating the struggle of African American people, trivializing it. Several hundred years of slavery and oppression is somehow comparable to misgendering someone. Fucking joking. Why African Americans aren't raging about this. I'm insulted, not you black, and I'm not even American. Bloke grabbing the world offered to women, thus proving male privilege.
The world is far too complicated and nuanced to fit into two oppositional categories only.
Alok, do you know how babies are made? The difference between sex and gender. You want to wear a dress, you want to express yourself, that's fine. You're always going to be male. You were born with a cock and balls. And that's just the way it is. It's fine. Just relax. Wear a dress. You are a bloke. A bloke who likes wearing dresses. And that's fine. That's cool. Just be you.
In our patriarchal society, women and femmes are taught from a young age that we have to be beautiful.
Look, just fuck off, Alok. Fucking joking me. Is that what we are? Fuck off.
To be evaluated by, I don't know, our ideas or personality because people are too busy commenting on our appearances.
Stop trying to compare your fucking fetish to womanhood. It's really fucking insulting, especially when you do it wearing that stupid blonde wig. And I cannot believe the pathetic handmaidens tolerated your shit. Because what you're doing is actually sickening. It's as insulting as what you're doing to pretend you're as oppressed as African Americans. It's that level of insult. What you're doing in your blonde wig, like a fucking gross parody. Yeah, I'm quoting fucking Jermaine Greer. Fuck off.
It's no secret that humans used to think some things that are actually very wrong were totally right.
This is the part where Alok starts sounding a bit like a pedo. He released some statement on his Facebook, Dark Matter, where he's basically trying to appropriate little girl and pretend that he has any fucking clue what it's like to be a little girl. Just the whole thing's just really creepy. Even his fans could see that it was fucked up. So we asked him to take it down. He's reposted it. I actually can't bring myself to quote this, so I'm just going to urge you to judge for yourself. I just don't feel comfortable saying those words on camera, to be honest. What the fuck is a scapegoat in child abuse? There is, like, a child is never guilty. They are fucking innocent victims. They're children, for fuck's sake. Archetypal white cis. So now he's trying to assign privilege to a child abuse victim, which is possibly the most disgusting thing I can think of ever. I mean, I think we can all agree, no matter how oppressed we are, that you just don't do that. You just don't do that unless you're twisted as fuck.
Soon you'll find that the world is super textured and layered, and there's actually enough room to respect how weird we actually all are.
This fucking vocal minority of narcissists are able to promote paedophilia, appropriate lesbianism, appropriate womanhood. They will appropriate gay, don't worry, that'll come. Because no one gives a fuck about any of these groups. Clearly, everyone who said they did Are you really just going to sit there and take this? Come on, man. Stand up for yourselves. Fuck's sake, this is ridiculous. Wake the fuck up, man. Wake up.
Okay. So, just again, thank you very much to Julie Birchall. Thank you to Venice, who always organises and gets the left.